Alrighty, if there's anybody out there, please flick a message and see if we're live and if you can hear me. All right, flying solo tonight. My name's Anthony Irvine. I'm a councillor on Temora Shire Council, but none of the views I express here are those of Temora Shire Council. They're mine and mine alone. This is Dean and Herb Spin Doctors. My co-host, Dean McRae, is unavailable tonight. He's down in Melbourne partaking in the game of AFL football. So he's got that as a work trip, so good on him. He's obviously earned it. And I think his young fella's down there with him and a crew from work, so they're having a great time. We're just catching up. We've been flat out. There's been so much stuff going on. My co-host Dean was off in Foster, I think, with kids footy during the school holidays a couple of Thursdays ago, and then he had some family stuff pop up, some family health issues with his auntie die last week, so he's had to deal with that. And in the meantime, I've been flat out. I had a council meeting last week, so it's been pretty hard to get time together to get here and to stay in touch. But I've made the effort tonight. It won't go for very long. It's just a little update and just a touch base so that everyone knows that we're still alive and kicking and all doing well. So all things considered, we are doing really well. I've been having a great time. I've had some really good experiences lately. And we are making some real progress. And I know Dean's doing really well. He's flat out all the time, but he's things in his world are going pretty well, apart from Di's health issues. But even the outcome from that appears to be positive. So, and it's at this stage, I won't say anything much more about Di's health other than to say that it was a pretty common minor procedure, and the outcome seems to have been quite good, with no anticipated long-term issues. So that's about all you can hope for this day and age. I got contacted before the council meeting last week by a concerned citizen whose wife had been fined for illegal parking in Temora. And I was a little bit surprised because it's not a common occurrence. And the individual was a little bit, they copped it on the chin. They weren't whinging about the fine. They realised that they'd been there longer than they should have been. But the issue was the inconsistency with the policing of it. And as most people will appreciate, if the policing of something's consistent, even, and expected, then people moderate their behaviour. If the policing of something's inconsistent, then people fall into bad habits, and then they're frustrated when it just turns out that they happen to be there at the wrong phase of the moon on a particular leap year when the inspections get done. And I can sympathise with that. And I think it's a little bit unfair. And I raised it at the council meeting last week. I'll just give you some background. There's no report available other than the regulatory reports from the Ranger, but I've gone back 12 months or so. So I'll just run through these stats and you guys can make your own mind up. But I do sympathise with the individual who's this fella's wife who's been fined for illegal parking, because when you review these stats, it's a bit hard to see how there's any consistency in the policing of it. So believe it or not, in August last year, which was the last meeting before the council elections, there was a report came to council that in reference to illegal parking, there were 9 inspections over the this was over the months of June and July 2024. And out of the 9 inspections, 2 were warned. There was 1 impoundment, 3 no issues, 2 infringement notices. So note that June, July 2024, there were 2 infringement notices and 1 report to police. Now, in May 2024, so the month prior, there were 6 inspections with no issues, 1 report of a blocked driveway, and the parking officer spoke to the owner, and there were 2 warnings issued regarding the school drop-off at the high school. There were no infringement notices. Now, so that's May, June and July of last year. The council elections were on in September, so the council stood down. There was no council meeting. There was no council meeting in October that I'm aware of. I think that was all being finalised. I think the first meeting was back to council in November 2024. So the report from the parking inspector was that there were 2 inspections, and there was 1 move on direction given, and one contacted the police. So there was no infringement notices issued. In December last year, there were 3 inspections conducted, 2 with no issues and 1 move on direction given, but no infringement notices issued. January this year, there were 7 inspections, 5 with no issue and 2 warnings, but still no infringement notices issued. In February this year, there were 7 inspections, and 2 of those were for abandoned cars. 2, there were no issues found, and there was 3 inspections with no mention of infringement notices. March. So this is dealing obviously with the month of February because the report's issued in March. There were 6 inspections, 4 spoke to the owners, and 2 with no issues, but no infringement notices issued. In the April meeting, the report obviously deals with March. There were 10 inspections, 4 spoke to owners and 6 by no issues, but no infringement notices issued. In April, at the May meeting, the April report was given, and there were 8 inspections with no infringement notices noted. So we're up to June. Dealing with the month of May, there were 5 inspections, no infringement notices given. And then, of course, we come to the July report, with the report dealing with the month of June. There were 9 inspections with 8 infringements issued between Hoskins Street, Loftus Street and Park Street in Temora. So you've got to go all the way back to June and July of 2024, so 2 full months, and there were 2 infringement notices issued over the 2 months, and yet here we are dealing with the month of June. There were 9 inspections with 8 infringement notices issued between Hoskins Street, Loftus and Park Street. So that, to me, seems terribly inconsistent, and I do sympathise with the residents who've been fined. If anyone wants to contact me, I'd be only too happy to take the matter up with management at council and represent on your behalf, because that's my job. Council have got access to all sorts of media channels that they use freely and often, and I haven't seen any warnings that infringement notices will be issued for overstaying your welcome in a parking space. And I do think it's extremely unfair to basically go for a full 12-month period without any infringement notices being given, and then in the space of 1 month issue 8. particularly when there's been no warning given to the community. So that allows bad habits to develop. It allows people to assume that they're not going to be fined, and then all of a sudden, whack, 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 fines going out left, right and centre, and I think it gets people's back up. One thing that I did notice in the last few days driving around town and just going about my day-to-day, all the council staff aren't parking out the front of the council offices, which has always been a common practice. Council staff members, there's a 2-hour parking on both sides of the street in Loftus Street near the council chambers and council offices. But all of a sudden it looks like it's a Sunday. There's car parks everywhere. So all these people who used to park there, for whatever reason, have decided not to park there. Now, could they have been warned that they'll be fined if they park in the wrong spot? You know, the rest of the community hasn't been warned, and that's only a guess, but it's just unusual to see so many parking spaces basically available in front of such a busy building with so many people movements over the course of a day. One councillor, when I mentioned this in the council meeting last week, spoke up against what I was saying, indicating that it's a regular occurrence that infringement notices are issued, but clearly not. And I did say that it calls for a report. Well, I've done the report. None of the information here is secret information. It's all contained within the minutes of Temora Shire Council's meetings, and it's in the council of business papers in the section at the end of the meeting every month. So it's common knowledge, it's public knowledge, it's a public report. So I suppose in the interest of public harmony and well-being, I want to just point out to all the community members that it appears that parking is now being policed on certainly based on the June figures, a much increased level. So please be mindful of where you park and for how long you've been there. Because the last thing I want to see is people getting fined and causing them financial hardship, a lot of angst, and the unexpected fine, considering that the policing of this stuff doesn't occur. There's been a lot of warnings issued over a 12-month period, but no infringements. And now all of a sudden the infringements are starting to flow. So do yourselves a favour, find somewhere to park that isn't in a time zone if you need to stay there for longer periods. I don't know how it works for people like myself who are tradespeople and have to work in the main street for extended periods of time, and we need our vehicles on the job sites with all our tools and our equipment, scaffold, paint, all the things that a tradie needs at hand when they're doing a job for a client. It's going to make it fairly impossible if we've got a 2-hour parking limit, and every time we have to go out, pack the whole ute up, move it to car park spaces to tick the boxes for the parking inspector. And if that's the case, if they want to enforce it that hard, well, all those costs will have to get passed on to the end user, the consumer, and it'll just add to the cost of an already expensive exercise just due to a lot of red tape that people are already jumping through. So not a pretty situation. I've always taken the opinion that cooperation from the community is much more appropriate. Education, cooperation, and a bit of teamwork. And if you do then have a recalcitrant individual or an issue where you do need to use some enforcement, we'll use it sparingly. But it appears that that isn't the case, and there's certainly been no warning given in a public sense that the parking infringements issuance is going to be so frequent and almost immediate. So look after yourselves. Now, I suppose one answer to the parking problem, and this is another question that really comes back down to the foresight or lack thereof of previous councils. Where do we bloody park? The CBD is a busy place. There's no or very few public car parks. There's a small car park behind the Masonic Lodge that I think council pay a small lease for each year. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that just to clarify, and I'll make a note and call it homework. I think there's some arrangement regarding council might be paying electricity for, there's something to do with, I know that's a particular situation when the one of the travelling vans come to town and they need to use that space. I'll have to look into it. Masonic Lodge car park arrangement. So I'll get some more info on that so we know where we're up to. There's a car park at the back of the council offices, but it's pretty much full of council staff. And of course, we've got our electric vehicle charging station that 99.9% of the time isn't used. So that takes up a couple of parks. So that's unfortunate, but realistically, that's it. The only other car parks of note are obviously business provided. So we've got a car park down in the Woolworths car park, but that's provided obviously for Woolworths customers and the customers of the other businesses in that precinct. And there's a car park at the IGA supermarket, but obviously that's run and maintained by the IGA supermarket for their customers. So we're at a real shortage of council parking in Temora, which is unfortunate, and that's just a lack of foresight on previous councils. And obviously there's been no mention of any provision of any securing any land and providing more car parking for the community going forward, which will be an impediment to the development of a thriving CBD when you consider that, you know, one of the goals of a centre like Temora is to attract people from outlying areas. And of course, they're not going to ride a bike to town or ride a horse to town. They're going to drive a car and they're going to need somewhere to park. One of the solutions, of course, that council have introduced recently, which was disappointing, but that's what the council decisions are like. Sometimes you can have a fairly cogent argument. It doesn't mean that that argument's going to be supported by your fellow councillors, but there's been a residence approved in the CBD, the building of a private residence. They're clearly, if you fill the CBD up full of private residences, then there's very little need for parking for businesses. So I suppose that's one way to deal with the parking issue, is to fill it up with residences, and then we don't have to worry about car parks for business, for people getting to the businesses. So that's a roundabout way of dealing with it. But anyway, it's how it goes. There was a really unfortunate, well, I won't say unfortunate, but inconsistent, in my opinion, decision made at the council meeting last week. And the decision revolved around the removal of a couple of big London plane trees that are affecting the operations of a business in Baker Street. Now, the business is the car wash. The big London plane trees are dropping huge amounts of leaves and leaf litter, and they drop a seed pod, and they're causing to block drains and other issues for the operators and consistent maintenance costs for the operators. And they asked council to consider the removal of the trees. The decision from the council was that council would accede to the request, provided the owners picked up the full cost of removal, repair of the road surface or the surrounds, and replanting of a suitable species. So these business owners, whilst they may choose to accept that offer of council's, because it will obviously cost them a pretty penny to have the job done, but if their maintenance costs reduce more, then they'll probably think it's a smart business decision. I think it's a little unfair and fairly inconsistent with council's recent decisions regarding a ironbark tree that was out the front of Temora Truck and Tractor Service on Victoria Street. It came to council a few months ago, and council voted to remove the tree and pick up the tab. Now, the request came from Temora Truck and Tractor Service, and on the premise that the tree dropped a lot of leaf litter and debris on their display stock, It obstructed the view to their display stock and caused them some inconvenience in terms of keeping the yard clean and everything else. One of the arguments that was brought up in relation to the earlier matter that I spoke of was that the tree was there first before the car wash got built. So the owner should have known that, and realistically, it's their problem. Well, judging from the size of the ironbark tree out the front of Temora Truck and Tractor Service, the same argument applies there. The tree was there first, therefore Temora Truck and Tractor Service, if they want the tree removed, really should pick up the tab. Temora Shire Council, though, piped up and they had an additional add-on to that actual report where their requirement is that they need to do some adjustments to the causeway, the inlet structure into the causeway that goes under the main road. Now that causeway, I remember it got put in and it wasn't that long ago. It'd have to be around 10 years, ballpark. Time flies when you're having fun. But I remember when they put it in and I'm telling you the tree was there then. So Temora Truck and Tractor got built after the tree was there. Temora Shire Council put the causeway in after the tree was there. And Temora Shire Council picked up the tab for the removal of that tree. They still haven't removed the butt of the tree. They've taken that. They've paid contractors to remove the bulk of the head of the tree and get it down to some manageable size, and they've left enough there to rip out with an excavator. But obviously, ripping a tree out of that size is going to bust up the gutter, the curb and gutter, and the roadway in that vicinity. So they're probably avoiding taking out that section of the tree until they're ready to do the works associated with the drain. But I'm just disappointed that there's no consistency in those type of decisions, and that's what I strive for, really. I believe that the community deserve consistency in the decisions, and I think it's good governance that people can see some relationship between the decisions council make so that they can understand and there isn't a perception of, favouritism or inconsistent answers or inconsistent decisions from council. So that tree decision for mine was a bad decision. The decision's been made. I can't change it, but it just lacks consistency, and I think that lack of consistency is unfortunate. One thing that I have raised in the past, and I will note, in relation to trees, there were some white cedar trees removed in Victoria Street out the front of some units, and the replacement trees that have gone in are jacarandas, which, to my mind, is a pretty sensible decision. I've spoken to some elderly residents of Temora, and they can't remember a time when the jacarandas in Victoria Street weren't there. And these are people approaching their 80s and or in their 80s. So the jacarandas drop a little bit of leaf litter at times, but they're a pretty attractive tree. They don't seem to do any infrastructure damage, or very little. There's certainly no uplift on the curb and gutter around the base of these trees. And they seem to be hardy. They seem to do well in the urban environment. So I think if people are observant, they're open to just consider and just watch and see what does well in the locale, you can find suitable replacements. And also I think we've got to look outside our own little backyard and just see what other councils are using. There's an interesting tree that I found a couple of examples of that they use extensively down around Echuca. Campaspe Shire is the shire down there. And it's an evergreen Australian native tree. And there's a couple of examples that I found in Temora, and it seems to do well here. So hopefully council will consider trialling those trees in a few locations, and we might find another alternative. One of the big risks that council run, there's a disease that can get into elm trees. So council have got a fair few Chinese elms around. We don't want to have too many of them in case the situation becomes conducive to having this illness sweep through that population of trees, and we lose a significant number of important trees in one event. There is a significant tree register. If anybody in the community has got any particular trees of note that they would like council to consider and place on the significant tree register. So if there are specific trees within the community that people feel are of real significance to a proportion, a larger proportion of the community, I think I'm quite happy to take any of those suggestions to council and put them up. So that's the tree issues. I can't talk about the specifics, but mentioned in the confidential business papers, which are listed in the open business papers for last week's meeting, was a matter at NCAT. I can talk about the subject matter. I had to leave the meeting whilst matters concerning this were discussed because council were receiving some legal advice. Now, obviously, I've brought the matter to NCAT, so it was probably appropriate that I leave the room whilst the rest of the council received their legal advice, considering I'm the applicant and Temora Shire Council are the respondent. Now, we're revisiting this chestnut that is, it's just an absurd situation in my mind, whereby a deed of employment was entered into with council's previous general manager, Gary Lavelle, and it was entered into by the council, the governing body, on behalf of the residents and ratepayers of Temora Shire. And when I asked to see a copy of this deed, I was told that in order for me as a councillor to see a copy of this, I had to sign a document that prevented me from discussing it with anyone. I had to view a paper copy of it. I couldn't take a copy of it. I couldn't take notes. I had to view it in the company of the mayor in the council chambers, and I had to sign a legal undertaking that I would not divulge any of the contents of that document to a third party. That to me is just unacceptable. This agreement's entered into on behalf of the residents and ratepayers of Temora Shire Council, and I can't even freely see the document as a councillor. I think it's ridiculous and absurd. So I submitted an application through the GIPA process for access to the document, and subsequently I've managed to have publicly released about 90% of the document. There are about, off the top of my head, 5 or 6 paragraphs that are still reasonably heavily redacted that I'd like access to. So we're returning to NCAT to have a hearing on the 22nd of August relative to those matters. Temora Shire Council have engaged a highly credentialed and very, very high-powered, well-resourced legal team, business that does a hell of a lot of local government work, called Lindsay Taylor Lawyers, out of George Street in Sydney. It's down the road from where the hearing will be. And of course, due to the huge lack of resources that I suffer, I'll be representing myself. So again, it's a David and Goliath battle. So far, I've been told I can't have any of it, and I've got 90% of it. And I think there's a snowflake's hope that we might be able to get access to the rest of it, so that the community might understand what agreements have been entered into on their behalf by their governing body, so that they can understand whether or not they're, in their opinion, doing a fair and reasonable job with their money. So that's where that's at. And I haven't divulged anything that's not public knowledge, and the things listed for hearing. They're the basic matters. There is a decision already on Case Law New South Wales relative to the lead-up matters, and we're going back just to try and get the final redactions lifted, and hopefully have a bit of accountability and transparency, a bit of light shone on the issue at Temora Shire Council. That's probably the nuts and bolts of really what I've got to talk about today. There are a number of things afoot. I've got a couple of GIPA requests in for some pretty sensitive information that council really don't want to give me. Once that's resolved, because I really don't think council have got any premise to refuse the provision of the information. I think they're just doing it. I don't know. I can't say for what reasons other than they just don't want it publicly released. But my understanding of the GIPA Act, I can't see how they can argue that it's in the public interest not to release it. And anyone who's familiar with the GIPA Act will understand that the objective of the Act is that all government information is public access unless the agency can prove a public interest against its release. So never, ever, ever let a council or a government agency tell you that you can't have a document unless they can prove, in respect to the GIPA Act, a public interest against the release of that document. Quite often they'll say, no, you can't have that. But that's not true. You need to familiarise yourselves with the GIPA Act, use it if you feel as though you're being denied information that should be public access. On that note, and talking about transparency and accountability, and I better check, because up until today, the recording from last week's council meeting wasn't up on council's website. Let's see. I'm just checking on the council website to see if it's been uploaded yet. No, so the agenda for the 17th of July council meeting's there. The minutes from the July council meeting are there. But unfortunately, the recording's not. Now, the minister's made it very clear that all council meetings, including committee meetings, are to be live streamed. Live streamed. That means at the time that they're held. Council have been slack, in my opinion, and haven't got around to live streaming their meetings. They've fallen back on a provision that they were allowed to get away with previously, whereby they can upload a recording of the meeting at a later date. But that's usually promptly following the meeting, as soon as possible or as soon as convenient. A week after isn't good enough. So I know my co-host Dean has offered to sponsor and to offer technical advice to Temora Shire Council to assist them to live stream their meetings. I recommend they take that up as a matter of urgency. Accountability and transparency isn't served by excluding the residents and ratepayers from the discussion and from the decision-making process. If council want the trust of the community, then they have to engage the community. They have to allow the community to be part of the process. And if the community can see the discussion and they can see that the discussion is level and sensible, and they can understand the various points of view around that discussion and around the decision-making process, then the community can be satisfied that council are doing a good job. But when the decision-making process is hidden, then suspicions arise within the community as to the decision-making process and the motives and the arguments put forward. And I understand that. I've been involved with enough organisations over the years to know that the best way you get buy-in from your members is to open up and share the info and offer everyone as much information as you possibly can. And if they are happy with what you're doing, generally you won't hear boo out of them. And if there's something that they've got a concern about, they'll raise it. And if your answer satisfies that, then they can carry on their merry way, and they're usually quite happy with the way you're conducting things. Now, what's the problem, Temora Shire Council? How about we live stream these meetings as a priority? Even the minister, it is meeting with the Temora councillors when he visited only recently, made the comment that all you need these days is a mobile phone and you can live stream meetings. So I don't know what the hold up is. I'm just sure it's just purely an idea of keeping secrets. I know this council go out of their way to keep secrets. I've had to use the GIPA Act for things that should never, ever, ever be kept from me as a councillor. Basic things that it should be just given up really easily. I have to go and fill out a formal access application, pay my $30 application fee. A staff member then has to spend time working on it just to provide information that should be accessible for anyone in an organisation that is open and transparent and accountable to the community that they serve. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm really disappointed that that hasn't happened yet, and I'm going to push really hard for that to happen. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Not all of it's positive, but, you know, that's life. There are some really, really good things afoot, and I think if you have the right attitude and you work really hard and you connect with the right people in the community, you can have a really positive experience in Temora. There's always going to be some elements in the community that are, what would you say, counterproductive, self-interested, and don't want to share. But the majority of the community are pretty level-headed people, and they just want to get on and have a good life and make the best of it together in a pretty tough world. So let's just, get rid of the rubbish and start working together and start opening this joint up so that everyone knows what's going on. I'm going to wrap it up. I don't want to rabbit on too much tonight. I've got a heap of stuff to do. Dean's away. He's busy. We're going to throw together a pretty solid show next week. And there's a lot of stuff afoot at the moment. There's the Liverpool Council inquiries underway. There's some massive stuff going on at ICAC at the moment. There's the Cootamundra-Gundagai Regional Council demerge has been announced. So we need to look at that and have a bit of a deep dive and talk to some people from over there and just see what their views are. But it seems to have been pretty well accepted by the community. They've fought pretty hard for it. It's interesting to see that Minister Honig's managed to pull that off. How it all unfolds and how onerous the process is, we'll wait and see. But certainly the community's wanted it. And it's a positive step when the government will listen to the people that they're governing and give them a little bit of self-determination. So now it's in the hands of the Cootamundra and Gundagai communities to manage their own affairs effectively and sensibly and financially prudently, and to make a good fist of it for their communities. So I wish them all the best going forward in that. There's been a few people bashed up in the process along the way. Hopefully those people can heal, and hopefully the announcement last week helps them move forward. All right, wrapping up. Thanks very much for tuning in. I hope this has come out okay. Like I say, I'm flying solo. I'm not the production manager as a rule. So all the best, and we'll talk to you next week.